August 12th, 30 BC. Alexandria, the largest and most sophisticated city of the ancient world, was waiting. Rome had arrived. The army of Augustus, still known then as Octavian, had already entered the city. Egypt was defeated. The war was over. All that remained was the final symbol of victory. Cleopatra. The Roman soldiers expected spectacle. They imagined marching her through Rome in chains, a living trophy, proof that the last great rival of the Republic had fallen. But inside the sealed royal mausoleum, events were unfolding very differently. According to the official Roman version, when officers finally entered the chamber, they found Cleopatra lying on a golden couch, dressed in royal garments, crown on her head, 2 loyal attendants dead beside her. There were no signs of struggle, only 2 small marks on her arm. The explanation was simple. She had taken her own life with the bite of an Egyptian cobra. It's a powerful story, dramatic, symbolic, easy to remember. But when you examine it closely, it starts to fall apart. The Egyptian cobra, Naja Haje, is not a small snake. It can grow up to 2 meters long. It's muscular, aggressive when threatened, and very noticeable. The popular story says it was hidden inside a basket of figs and carried past Roman guards. But think about the situation. This was not a casual visit. Cleopatra was under close surveillance. Octavian needed her alive. Guards would have checked everything entering the tomb. Smuggling in a large cobra unnoticed would have been extremely difficult. Then there's the medical problem. Cobra venom is neurotoxic. It shuts down muscles gradually, including the muscles required for breathing. Death is rarely instant. It can involve paralysis, respiratory distress, and visible physical reactions. Yet Roman sources describe Cleopatra as calm, composed, almost peaceful. That doesn't match what modern toxicology tells us about cobra envenomation. And here's something even more important. Octavian wanted her alive. He needed her for his triumph in Rome. Parading defeated rulers was political theater. It demonstrated absolute power. Her death robbed him of that moment. Instead of a chained queen, he was left with a body, perfectly arranged, beyond humiliation. That outcome feels less like a desperate suicide and more like a controlled decision. Not emotional, strategic. And if it was strategic, then the cobra story may have been a cover. Before we go any further, we need to erase something. Forget the image of Cleopatra as a helpless beauty bathing in milk, charming, powerful men with nothing but her eyes. That version mostly comes from later Roman propaganda and Hollywood. The real Cleopatra was far more dangerous and far more intelligent. If you want to see her real face, don't look at movies. Look at the coins. Ancient coins are the most reliable portraits we have, and what they show is not a soft, delicate beauty. They show a sharp nose, a strong chin, firm features, an intense expression. This is not the face of a decorative queen. It's the face of a ruler. Here's something most people don't realize. Cleopatra wasn't ethnically Egyptian. She was Greek. She belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of one of the generals of Alexander the Great. For nearly 300 years, her family ruled Egypt without even speaking the Egyptian language. They stayed culturally Greek. They married within their own bloodline to preserve power. But Cleopatra was different. She was the first in her dynasty to actually learn Egyptian. She didn't just rule Egypt, she chose to understand it. And that decision changed everything. She reportedly spoke 7 languages, possibly more: Greek, Egyptian, Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, Ethiopian, and others. She could negotiate without translators, which, in diplomacy, is a massive advantage. Words lose power when filtered through someone else. Cleopatra understood that. Now imagine her daily routine. Morning, military strategy discussions with admirals. Afternoon, diplomatic negotiations in multiple languages. Night, studying medicine, astronomy, mathematics. This wasn't unusual for her, it was expected. Alexandria was the intellectual capital of the ancient world. The great library stood there. Scholars from across continents gathered there. Cleopatra grew up inside that environment. She read scientific texts in their original languages. She studied pharmacology, especially plant-based compounds and toxins. She understood economics. She understood naval logistics. She was, essentially, the CEO of the richest kingdom in the Mediterranean. Egypt wasn't weak. It was wealthy. And Rome wanted that wealth. Cleopatra understood something very clearly. Rome was unbeatable in open combat. Their engineering, their discipline, their military organization. Trying to defeat Rome directly would be suicide. So she didn't. She shifted the battlefield. Instead of fighting Rome with swords, she targeted influence, psychology, culture, symbols. If you can't destroy the enemy's army, you reshape the enemy's mind. That's what she began to do. And this is where the symbol of the cobra becomes important again. In Egyptian culture, the cobra wasn't just a snake. It was the uraeus, the symbol of divine authority worn on the pharaoh's crown. To Egyptians, the cobra represented protection and sacred kingship. So if Cleopatra chose that symbol for her death, it wouldn't mean defeat. It would mean ascension. To Rome, it looked like suicide. To Egypt, it could look like a queen joining the gods. Two completely different interpretations. One carefully designed message. Now, here's where it becomes unsettling. Ancient sources suggest Cleopatra experimented with poisons, not recklessly, scientifically. She tested different substances on condemned prisoners to observe effects, time to death, physical symptoms, pain levels. That sounds brutal. But in her world, knowledge of toxins was a form of national security. Assassination was common. Poison was political currency. If Cleopatra wanted control over her final moment, she would not rely on chance. She would select something precise, something predictable, something that preserved her appearance. Because even in death, image mattered. Her final act wasn't emotional. It was controlled branding. She denied Octavian the humiliation he wanted. She preserved her dignity. And she turned her death into mythology. That's not panic. That's strategy. History often reduces Cleopatra to one simple idea. She seduced powerful men. But let's be realistic. Julius Caesar was in his 50s when he met her. A battle-hardened general, a political mastermind, a man who had survived civil war and countless conspiracies. Mark Antony was not a naive romantic either. He was a soldier, disciplined, experienced, ambitious. These were not men who lost empires over a pretty smile. So if Cleopatra influenced them, it wasn't through fantasy. It was through precision. The historian Plutarch, who gathered accounts from people who had actually known her, wrote something very revealing. He said her beauty was not overwhelming at first sight. What was unforgettable was her presence, her voice. He described it as musical, flexible, capable of adapting to any listener. Today, we would call this advanced psychological mirroring. She adjusted tone, rhythm, energy. With Caesar, she spoke as an intellectual equal. With generals, she was strategic and direct. With Antony, she could be playful, relaxed, disarming. She didn't seduce men. She calibrated to them. That is far more powerful. There's a famous story. Cleopatra and Mark Antony argued over who could host the most expensive dinner in history. To win, she removed a priceless pearl earring, dropped it into vinegar, let it dissolve, and drank it. It sounds dramatic, wasteful, the behavior of a reckless queen. But chemically, it makes sense. A pearl is primarily calcium carbonate. Vinegar is acetic acid. When combined, they create a chemical reaction that produces calcium acetate, a compound used historically for digestive and tonic effects. In ancient medicine, this kind of mixture wasn't nonsense. It was considered energizing. Cleopatra lived under extreme stress, running a kingdom, negotiating alliances, planning war, managing spies. That pearl may not have been a stunt. It may have been an expensive performance, backed by real science, a demonstration of wealth, and an energy tonic, both at the same time. Ancient texts tell us she studied poisons closely, not like a villain in a story, like a researcher. She needed to know, how long does a compound take to act? What symptoms does it produce? Can it be delayed? Can it mimic illness? In the ancient world, assassination was common. A ruler who didn't understand toxicology was vulnerable. Cleopatra turned knowledge into defense, but she also understood something even more subtle. Chemistry doesn't only work through ingestion, it works through the air. When Cleopatra sailed to meet Mark Antony in Tarsus, ancient writers describe something unusual. Before her ship even arrived, people smelled it. Heavy incense, exotic perfumes, aromatic resins. Egypt was famous for a complex fragrance blend called kifi, a mixture of honey, wine, myrrh, raisins, and botanical extracts. Some of those ingredients are now known to influence mood and calm the nervous system. Imagine the scene. A Roman general used to the scent of leather, iron, and sweat, suddenly surrounded by warmth, music, soft light, fragrance designed to relax and elevate. She didn't just stage an entrance, she engineered an atmosphere, multi-sensory persuasion, sound, scent, visual symbolism. It was immersive psychology, centuries before psychology had a name. Antony didn't just meet Cleopatra, he entered her world. And once he stepped inside it, Rome felt colder. Cleopatra understood something critical. Men like Caesar and Antony did not just want power, they wanted legacy. She offered them something Rome couldn't: divinity. In Egypt, rulers were not elected officials, they were living gods. When Caesar spent time in Alexandria, something changed. He began acting less like a Roman statesman and more like a monarch. Golden statues, royal imagery, divine honors. Many historians debate why he shifted this way, but Cleopatra had shown him a different model of authority, one where power was absolute, sacred, eternal. That idea would outlive both of them. By 46 BC, Cleopatra arrives in Rome officially. To most Romans, this looked like diplomacy. To some senators, it looked like danger. She was staying in a villa across the Tiber, invited by Julius Caesar himself. That alone was controversial. Rome prided itself on being a republic. It hated kings. The word queen made senators uncomfortable. But Cleopatra didn't arrive alone. She brought scholars, astronomers, physicians, advisors from Alexandria, the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean. Rome was a military superpower. Alexandria was a knowledge superpower. And Cleopatra understood that knowledge changes empires more quietly than armies do. Before Cleopatra's influence, the Roman calendar was chaotic. It regularly drifted out of sync with the solar year. Priests had to manually adjust months. Political manipulation was common. Time itself was unstable. Cleopatra introduced Caesar to Egyptian astronomical precision. The result? The Julian calendar, a 365-day solar system with leap year correction, the foundation of the modern calendar the world still uses. Think about that. Every time we check a date, on a phone, a computer, a document, we are using a time system shaped by Egyptian astronomy. Caesar signed the reform, but the intellectual roots came from Alexandria. That is influence at the deepest level. She didn't conquer territory. She influenced time. Rome claimed to despise monarchy. Yet after spending time with Cleopatra, Caesar began behaving differently. He accepted divine honors. He allowed his statue to stand among gods. He dressed in more regal attire. To many senators, this was alarming. But in Egypt, rulers were not just politicians. They were divine. Cleopatra ruled as the living embodiment of Isis. That concept of sacred authority was foreign to Rome, but powerful. After Caesar's assassination, Rome descended into chaos. Eventually, Octavian rose to power. And what did he become? The first emperor, officially known to history as Augustus. Rome did not return to pure republican rule. It transitioned into imperial rule, centralized, symbolic, elevated above ordinary politics. The republic died. The empire was born. And the model of divine authority looked very familiar. While armies fought, something else was spreading quietly: the cult of Isis. Temples dedicated to Isis appeared across Rome and beyond. Roman citizens were drawn to Egyptian spirituality. Why? Traditional Roman religion was transactional: rituals, duty, discipline. The cult of Isis offered something more personal: salvation, protection, afterlife hope. It was emotional, accessible, intimate. And Cleopatra had already publicly identified herself with Isis. So even after her death, her symbolic identity continued circulating inside Roman society. It wasn't military conquest. It was cultural absorption. Roman elites began copying Egyptian aesthetics: hairstyles, jewelry, religious symbols. This wasn't forced. It was aspirational. Cleopatra had transformed Egypt into a symbol of sophistication and mystique. Rome conquered Egypt politically, but culturally, Rome began absorbing it. And when a superpower starts imitating what it conquered, that's not simple victory. That's transformation. Cleopatra had a son, Caesarion, believed to be the biological son of Julius Caesar. If he survived, he would represent a direct heir to both Rome and Egypt. Official records say Octavian ordered his execution, but no verified body, no confirmed burial site. He simply disappears from history. Some theories suggest Cleopatra sent him east with wealth, possibly toward Ethiopia or India through established trade routes. There is no hard proof, but there is also no physical evidence of his death. And when history becomes silent like that, it leaves space for possibility. Now let's jump forward. Modern day, Vatican City, St. Peter's Square, the symbolic heart of Western Christianity. At the very center of the square stands something unexpected: a massive Egyptian obelisk, not a cross, not a statue of a saint, an Egyptian solar monument. This obelisk originally stood in Egypt. It was created for solar worship, connected to the cult of Ra, the sun god. It was later transported to Rome. But here's the question: why preserve it? Why spend enormous resources moving, erecting, and centering an Egyptian religious monument in the heart of a new global faith? Empires don't preserve symbols by accident. They repurpose them. Look at St. Peter's Square from above. The design forms an oval embraced by curved colonnades. Some historians have pointed out something interesting. The shape resembles an ancient Egyptian symbol, the Ankh, the symbol of life. Now, is this direct copying? Art historians debate that. But cultural absorption is rarely literal. It's gradual. Symbols evolve. Meanings shift. Old frameworks become new institutions, and Rome had already been absorbing Egyptian religious imagery for centuries before Christianity became dominant. Nothing appears in isolation. Statues were not always destroyed. They were reinterpreted. Temples were not always erased. They were rededicated. The form remains. The name changes. This is how belief systems survive political collapse. And remember, Cleopatra publicly identified herself with Isis. Her image, her symbolism, her divine branding, it didn't vanish with her body. It dissolved into culture. Now look at symbols of leadership. The tall ceremonial headdresses of later religious authority. The staff, curved at the top. In Egypt, pharaohs carried crook and flail, symbols of divine kingship and guidance. In Rome, imperial iconography slowly shifted toward elevated, sacred authority. The Roman Republic once rejected kingship, yet the Roman Empire fully embraced emperor worship. And after the empire fell politically, the structure of centralized spiritual authority remained. Systems change. Symbols persist. Cleopatra understood this. She lost a throne, but the model of divine rulership she promoted outlived her. Obelisks now stand in Rome, Paris, London, New York. They are displayed as trophies of civilization, but originally they were solar symbols, connected to Egyptian cosmology. When Rome conquered Egypt, it transported obelisks as proof of dominance. But over time, those monuments stopped being foreign. They became Roman, then European, then global. That's how cultural transfer works. What was once conquered becomes foundational. Cleopatra lost militarily. That part is clear. Egypt became a Roman province. Octavian declared victory. But look at what happened afterward. Rome adopted Egyptian timekeeping, Egyptian religious imagery, Egyptian symbolism of divine authority. The Republic transformed into empire. Sacred kingship replaced elected governance. The conqueror absorbed the conquered. Cleopatra may not have defeated Rome in battle, but her ideas did not disappear. They migrated. And sometimes, migration is more powerful than survival. If Cleopatra was this intelligent, this strategic, this forward-thinking, why did Egypt still fall? To answer that, we have to remove the romance again and look at cold reality. Cleopatra's greatest problem may not have been Rome. It may have been time. Her dynasty, the Ptolemies, had ruled for nearly 300 years, and they had one dangerous habit. They married within the family, brother to sister, uncle to niece. The goal was bloodline purity. But biologically, that creates long-term instability. Historians and geneticists refer to it as dynastic degeneration. Over generations, resilience weakens. Cleopatra herself appears to have been intellectually exceptional, but she may have been the final bright spark of a declining system. Even if she had defeated Augustus, the structural weaknesses of her dynasty would still remain. There was another factor: money. During Cleopatra's reign, the Nile's flooding patterns were unstable. Poor floods meant poor harvests. Poor harvests meant rising prices and public dissatisfaction. Egypt was wealthy, but it was under pressure. Meanwhile, Rome was expanding aggressively. Young, militarized, economically hungry. Rome wasn't just fighting wars. It was absorbing resources at a scale Egypt couldn't match anymore. Even a genius cannot reverse demographic and economic momentum overnight. Cleopatra understood this, which is why she didn't try to destroy Rome. She tried to merge with it. There's a modern concept that helps explain what she did. A meme. Not the internet kind, but a unit of cultural information that spreads from mind to mind. Ideas behave like viruses. They replicate. They mutate. They survive long after their creator is gone. Cleopatra launched an idea, the idea of sacred rulership, divine empire, centralized authority infused with symbolism. After defeating her, Octavian did something interesting. He did not restore full republican democracy. He became emperor. He reshaped Rome into a centralized imperial system. He even built Rome in marble, projecting permanence and grandeur. In many ways, he became a version of what he claimed to defeat. Rome swallowed Egypt and became Egypt itself. Look at the modern world. Ceremonial inaugurations, grand architecture symbolizing state authority, leaders elevated above ordinary politics. The language of power is still theatrical, still symbolic, still carefully staged. Cleopatra understood that symbols move people more deeply than policies do. She weaponized image, and that strategy has never disappeared. One last example. The Statue of Liberty. The sculptor originally imagined placing a monumental female figure at the entrance of the Suez Canal in Egypt, titled, "Egypt Bringing Light to Asia." The project changed. The statue moved to New York. But look closely at the form. A robed woman, a torch of illumination, a classical, almost ancient posture. It's not direct evidence of continuity, but it shows something important. The archetype of the powerful symbolic woman, bringer of light, embodiment of civilization, endured. From Isis to Cleopatra to modern iconography. Cleopatra lost her kingdom. Her dynasty ended. Egypt became a province, but her ideas migrated into Rome, and Rome shaped the modern West. Maybe Cleopatra didn't control every outcome. Maybe some things simply happened in the chaos of collapsing empires. But from a historical perspective, one detail is impossible to ignore. Even today, more than 2,000 years later, we're still asking the question. That means she succeeded in one undeniable way. She made herself unforgettable. And sometimes, in history, that's more powerful than winning.